So, sir, can I tell you about this show that I went to?
Have you consumed more public entertainment?
I have, actually, not of the silver screen variety, but actually a live performance.
Oh, how exciting.
Tiny got us tickets to the opening performance of the Joffrey Ballet's performance of The Nutcracker here in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have always wanted to go to a ballet. I've always wanted to see a ballet. And she's wanted to see the Nutcracker, and she had never been to like an actual big theater performance. And so we went. Well, I guess it was the night of Friday the 1st, so it was a few days ago for us at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very interesting performance.
Interesting? You say interesting as like it wasn't interesting in a good way?
Well, okay, let me qualify first.
Okay.
It was a beautiful show.
All right.
The dancing was amazing.
Good.
Which is what you... And the music was the music. You know, it's Tchaikovsky's music. So, but they decided to do some very interesting things with the plot of the Nutcracker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they decided to focus more heavily on the aspects of the plot that involved the migrant workers constructing the 1893 Chicago World's Fair.
There were aspects of that in the plot originally?
That was my question.
What?
Yeah, so it was, yes, so, and they also focused very heavily on a young girl trying to hook up her single mother with her mother's boss.
I'm sorry. I've never seen the Nutcracker.
Nor had I.
In any form.
Right.
But I've always had the impression that there's a wooden soldier, hence the Nutcracker. There's a rat of some description or a mouse of some description.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a sugar plum fairy or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and those aspects were there in the show also, but they decided to downplay those aspects and focus more heavily on the Chicago World's Fair.
Okay, so was it a Chicago rat?
Presumably. Yes, actually it had to be, considering that it came from Chicago. All right.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry.
You're gonna have a lot of work here.
And
so.
let me tell also, Buffalo Bill's dance in the second act with his saloon girls was phenomenal.
Nope. I'm not understanding any of this.
Welcome to my world. This is okay. So first of all, like the Nutcracker, and I didn't realize it, but the Nutcracker ballet was actually not very successful when Tchaikovsky wrote it.
Nothing ever is the first time it comes out.
So what he did was he took the suite, which is all the music from the second act, and put that together into the Nutcracker suite, and that is what became really famous and well known. It wasn't the whole ballet.
Okay.
Though the ballet did eventually, take off, and I believe it was based on a fairy tale written by Dumas, the Three Musketeers guy. Right. So anyway, so the basic story of the Nutcracker is, there's a family having a Christmas party. And one of the counselors from the city shows up, who also happens to be a wizard of some description, and presents the girl with a nutcracker, which she treasures. She goes to sleep with the nutcracker, and in the middle of the night she wakes up to check on it, and when she does so, a bunch of rats come and kidnap her little brother. The wizard then appears, shrinks her down to tiny size, and the Nutcracker becomes an actual soldier and leads the Nutcracker, leads his wooden soldiers against the Rat King and all the rats who kidnapped her little brother. So it's basically the same plot as Labyrinth, which is why I assume David Bowie wore the tights in that.
Right.
Then that's the first act, and in the first act, then the Nutcracker kills the Rat King, rescues the brother, and then the Nutcracker turns into a handsome prince. Which you would think that would be the end of the show, but that's the end of the first act. In the second act,
okay,
the prince and the little girl, they dance off into Candyland or Sweetland or whatever the hell it is, and meet the Sugar Plum Fairy, who then dances them through all the different Candylands. And after that, the second act is just a bunch of performances of, oh, look, these are the Arabian coffee dance people, and these are the fairies of some other type of candy or whatever. I really don't know. So, and all that famous music from it all comes from the second act, and it's all just a series of short dance performances to different themes.
Uh-huh.
And then she wakes up because it was all like basically a dream.
The best ending ever.
Right. Yeah, of course. But then considering the climax happens halfway through the show, and then after that it's just, well, we'll just keep dancing.
Uh-huh.
You know, what are you going to do? It's not heavy on plot here.
Okay.
So it has become common for directors of this show to apparently make some tweaks to the story. But this director, he went really overboard. So the wizard is now the great impresario who is constructing the World Columbian exhibition. That word was hard. Which is also known as the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, which is like the only thing Chicago has to be proud of. So everything you do in Chicago, they all, like anything remotely historical or touristy, they always have to refer back to this one moment. You know, it's like that one time in high school where the quarterback threw the winning play and the winning pass, and that's just the moment he holds on to for the rest of his life. You know?
Right.
So, anyway, through the magic of projecting newsprint onto the walls, the story tells us that this is the story of the great impresario who is building his World's Fair, and he hires a bunch of migrant workers to build it. And the migrant workers are having an impoverished and ethnic Christmas celebration. You know, like the dancers in the steerage class in the Titanic movie. That sort of like, you know, we're all in overalls being Irish and poor and having a good time anyway because we know what life is really about. You know, that kind of a scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then the grand impresario... Oh, no. And meanwhile, the little brother of the girl who is the main character... He steals from the impresario and he steals something, and then there's a rat catcher who is chasing rats and scares the little boy away, and this got a little weird. But anyway, the impresario shows up to the migrant workers' Christmas party because there's nothing better, you know, for a Christmas party than when your boss crashes it. He shows up, he gives presents to all the kids, and there is also an elaborate dance of him paying his workers with his accountant there, checking off that each person has been paid. This is all communicated with no dialogue, just through the medium of dance. Which really...
Mm-hmm.
But he did that so we knew he was a good guy. You know, he can't be taking advantage of the workers. Right? And then he builds a giant model of the World's Fair on stage so that he could tell people how great the thing that they're building is going to be. And then he gives all the kids these creepy masks so that they can dress up like adult men and women and have this really flirty dance in the model. Like this 1890s courtship dance kind of a thing. So there's that. And then the impresario starts to put the moves on the girl's mother, whose job it is to sculpt a golden statue for the Chicago World's Fair. And the young daughter sees this and she's excited because I think she wants a father figure. And then he gives her the nutcracker. And then eventually the party peters out. She goes to sleep, wakes up, rats kidnap brother, and there's a quick fight between the rats and the wooden soldiers. Wooden soldiers turns into the prince, who also is the impresario's son, and end of Act 1. In Act 2, they meet not the Sugar Plum Fairy, but the golden statue who is the spirit of the World's Fair, apparently, who is played by the girl's mother. She and the impresario lead the girl and the prince through all the different pavilions of the World's Fair. The Arabian Pavilion, the Chinese Pavilion. And this is the stand-in for all those themed dances that come in the second act. One of which is when they go to Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
Which is not actually at the World's Fair because they wouldn't let him set it up there. They had to set it up outside and down the road.
Well, now you're just ruining the fun. Anyway, over the course of this, the impresario falls in love with the golden statue woman, and the girl falls in love with the prince, who is the son of the person they are trying to get to be her stepfather. So that's going to lead to some weird relationships later on.
Yep.
And at the end, they wake up, and the impresario shows up, and the girl hooks up the impresario with her mother, and presumably they all live happily ever after in a normal family unit. The end.
Okay.
Yeah. But, again, it was a really beautiful show. The dancing was amazing. The orchestra was fantastic. They played, all the music was the music from the Nutcracker. They had the Tetris theme in there.
Good.
Or at least the one that I knew as the Tetris theme, because I had the unlicensed Nintendo version of Tetris.
Sure.
Not the original, where they used Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies for the music.
Yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, Dance of the Golden Statue that is the spirit of the Chicago World's Fair. To give it a... Oh, and also one of the other weird dances was at one point, I guess they had time to fill and couldn't figure out what to do, so a bunch of kids come out dressed as walnuts and dance around the stage while they are being chased by wooden soldier nutcrackers who beat them up and crack them open. And that's the end of that dance. So, that's a really literal interpretation of this show.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite a show.
That was opening night, huh?
It was opening night. Actually, Mayor Daley was there, the Chicago mayor.
Oh.
And they dedicated the performance to him because of money they gave to the arts and family and all that stuff. And I'm surprised he wasn't lynched, because everybody in Chicago is very, very political. They wear their politics on their sleeves, and as near as I can tell, nobody likes Mayor Daley.
Yeah.
So... Yeah. So anyway, that was my week.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. It was really beautiful, though.
That's good. Because it would have to be at that point.
Wow. But yeah, I realized as we're going in there that I really didn't know the whole plot of the Nutcracker.
And you still don't really.
Well, I do, because I looked it up after the fact, because I was reading the plot summary to Tiny. As we were getting there, because, in the playbill they always give a synopsis. And for something like a ballet or an opera, it's actually good to know the story before you go in.
Yes.
So I'm reading it, and I'm like, I don't remember this classical Russian ballet figuring, focusing so heavily on the Chicago World's Fair.
Yeah. Yeah. That's weird. If you... That's a little too broad and too far away from the original source material for my taste.
Mm.
Well, I mean, I can see some parallels in there, but I don't generally go see. Well, I don't go see the Nutcracker. Period. End of sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't generally go to something that I've not seen before and want to see the broadest possible interpretation of it.
Well, no, I will agree with that. Given the choice, I would not have gone to see this show, which essentially, I mean, let's get down to it. Just like every other thing we see now, it's a remake.
Yes.
Okay? So, we can't even get away from remakes in classical theater now.
Yeah.
No. It looks like the original, but, we have to update it and, give it a good message.
Sure.
And it was they made sure that you knew that these weren't just employees. You had to know they were migrants. Because there is a strong political message in there about how immigrants have built, immigrants built everything that we're proud of.
Right. Okay.
You know. So, yeah.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I read, related to the story you have just regaled me with.
I refuse to believe that it could possibly be related to what I just said.
I read a book earlier this year I really enjoyed, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's The Devil in the White City.
Oh, yeah. You know, I have that on my shelf and have not yet read it.
You should read it because it's actually really good.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm pointing it out. Because
it does actually tie in. Good for you.
Yeah, I know. I don't just make this crap up. But it is set. It is telling the historical story of the Chicago World's Fair.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, telling the actual historical story of Dr. H.H. Holmes, who is a mass murderer, or a serial killer, if you prefer.
And he was quite the elaborate serial killer.
Oh, yes.
If I recall.
He took advantage of an opportunity presented by the World's Fair to basically rope in and kill a whole bunch of people.
Didn't he, wasn't he into, really elaborate death traps? Didn't he, wasn't he like Jigsaw?
No, not exactly.
You know.
He bought a building in Chicago,
mm-hmm.
and turned it into a hotel kind of thing, and converted it into what amounts to a sort of murder castle,
mm-hmm.
with all kinds of hidden rooms that drop people down into gas chambers and all kinds of stuff. And he had big lime pits in the basement that he would dispose of the corpses in and that kind of stuff.
Didn't he sell some of the corpses to local hospitals also for research? Or am I thinking something else?
Well, not exactly. He did for a lot, but there were also the odd one or two where he kept the skeleton
mm-hmm.
of his victim on display.
Yeah, well, you got to have your trophies too.
That kind of stuff. But yeah, he built a whole gas chamber and crematorium just in the hotel itself. And then, and if that's not strange enough, he also kind of sort of kidnapped a couple of kids.
Oh.
And then there's a whole part of the book which is the detective chasing him across the country, trying to catch up with him before something happens to the kids.
Oh, wow.
But along with that, you also have all the stuff about the Chicago World's Fair.
Mm-hmm.
You have things about what it took to get it made, how they did it, the troubles they had, that kind of stuff, and what it and what it changed about America.
Mm-hmm.
As a result of the World's Fair and things that went on there and were displayed there and shown, and also he manages to work in the sinking of the Titanic.
Really?
Because a couple of the major guys who were part of the World's Fair, one of them died on the Titanic.
Yeah, but wasn't that 20 years after the World's Fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So there's this rivalry between the two main architects behind the World's Fair and things that are going on. And it's all in this one book. And it is really an interesting and engaging story if you can stomach the serial killer part of it.
Right.
It's not graphic, but it will make you kind of go, ew, you know.
And do they also deal with the Rat King kidnapping the child of the migrant worker? Or did they just not address
Well,
that
strangely enough, I think they missed that part.
Huh.
I mean, you hope for thorough research on this stuff, and I think for the most part it is. But apparently he just missed that one.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess there was other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And they did get the kid back.
Mm-hmm.
Hey.
But yeah, The Devil in the White City. Links in the description. or the show notes, whatever you want to call them.
Are you still on your Dragon Quest kick?
I am still on my Dragon Quest kick. I am still somewhere in the middle of Dragon Quest 7. We'll just pretend that some progress has been made, but not sufficient to actually get me into Chapter 2 yet.
Okay. It's
yeah, I guess.
Wow.
I mean, I think I don't know. It's hard to tell. The chapters aren't marked real clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, and now Chapter 2. But I've got 50 plus hours in now. I'm approaching level 30. In fact, I think one of the characters just made level 30 earlier today. And normally in a Dragon Quest game up to this point, level 30 is okay. It's time to think about getting to the boss.
Mm-hmm.
No sign of the boss yet.
Has the boss even been named yet?
Well, he's the Demon King. That's all we know. Anyway, so that's still progressing. That's fine. But I actually wanted to talk about a different game altogether.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's called Fortnite Battle Royale. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of this, mainly because of them having some news. But
yeah well, the other thing you need to have heard of, probably, is PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds.
Yep.
Yeah. Or PUBG, as the kids call it.
Yeah. Yeah, who were none too pleased with Fortnite's.
Well, I think there's a very good reason for that. Aside from the art style, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. Okay. But no, what I want to talk about is, okay, I've played like 4 matches, right?
Right.
And I'm never going to play another one. It's just, and I will explain to you why this is. In Fortnite, I mean, and there's kind of an interesting story behind Fortnite and why it has this battle royale mode and all that stuff. But we're going to skip that for the moment.
Okay.
In the battle royale mode on Fortnite,
mm-hmm.
the idea is, for those of you who have never heard of this thing and don't know what we're talking about, 100 simultaneous players are dropped on a small island. The last survivor is the winner.
Mm-hmm.
You find weapon drops and all kinds of stuff, all this stuff. And at certain intervals, what they call the storm closes in on the island and cuts off access to various portions of it. So it's always driving people towards the center of wherever the eye of the storm is.
Right.
It's forcing people to be in there in a smaller and smaller space as the game progresses and compete against each other. So you can't really just camp anywhere
mm-hmm.
and hang out and hope.
Right.
Because if you do that, I discovered, the only thing that happens is you get to be the 6th man left. Without having to fire a shot at anybody or being shot at or anything like that. I literally found the center of where the storm was going to close on,
mm-hmm.
cozied up between 2 rocks and just sat there for the rest of the game until there were only 6 of us left. And then somebody finally spotted me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's not much of a game. At least it's not an interesting game.
What? Figuring out the safest possible location and praying nobody notices you?
Right.
Yeah, no, that I would argue that you're not exactly playing the game as intended at that point, so you can't complain that it's not fun when you play it that way.
But see, the problem is, every other time I played the game the way it was intended, top 20 at best.
Mm-hmm.
You know, playing the game the way it wasn't intended, top 10.
Okay.
It seems like a pretty clear strategy to me.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Minimal effort, right? Minimal effort.
Mm-hmm.
You know? No real work needed to be accomplished.
Well, you know,
anyway.
I should point out now that there are actually a lot of video games out there you can buy and paying enough money to the developer, you can pay to just not play the game and still win.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
that's a prize now, not having to play the game to win. I've had an annoyance chewing away at the back of my brain related to this for some time now.
Is this the BF2 annoyance?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but it's sort of related in a very, very loosely tangential way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm going to jump back. So, have you heard of Cuphead?
I have heard of Cuphead, yes.
Okay. Did you hear about the little bit of folderol with the one video game reviewer, the professional video game reviewer of 20 years, and his live stream of playing Cuphead?
I have heard about it from the fringes.
Okay.
I have not desired to go in and look any further.
Okay. Because what it did was it highlighted an argument that has been going back and forth in video games for some time, and that gelled for me a really, really major problem that I have. Can I go through it? Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead. Good.
Okay. Dean Takahashi. I don't remember who he reports for. I don't care. So he's playing this game Cuphead, which is an extremely difficult platformer type video game, run and gun type platformer video game, it's a beautiful looking game. It has, all the animation is inspired by the old cell shaded animation from way back in the Steamboat Willie days and stuff.
Right.
Where cartoons were really messed up.
Early 30s and 40s cartoon style.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So he's playing through the tutorial level, and he spends like a half hour stuck in the tutorial, just completely misunderstanding and disregarding the on-screen instructions telling him how to get past very obvious, simple obstacles. Okay.
Right. As I recall, he is trying to jump up on a box and then up onto another
and then
box.
Jump up onto another box. And what you have to do is you jump, and then you have to dash in midair to the top of the other box. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the instructions are there: jump and then dash. They're written right above it. And he's just like bouncing off the pillar and standing around. He's just not grasping it. And one of the most amusing things that came out of this was there's this very small YouTube channel called Adorable Gaming. Which basically consists of a 4-year-old child who plays video games very well, actually. And she was watching this stream and basically pointing out what this guy was supposed to be doing and shaking her head and indicating that he was quite bad. Okay? Mm-hmm. Naturally, gamers, being the most understanding and tolerant people in the world,
right,
took some umbrage with this, pointing out that, it's one thing if just somebody's mother is playing a video game and can't handle it, but this guy is a professional game reviewer of 20 years. And he really should be able to at least play through the introductory tutorial level, or else how can he really report on games, especially considering reviewers are expected to report on things like game controls, approachability, all of that stuff. Uh-huh. So it does affect the review. Right. Naturally, him and his fellows in the game journalism industry, being the reasonable and tolerant people that they are, immediately took umbrage with this and revived an argument that has been going around for some time of all games should have an easy mode of some variety, or a mode that lets you skip the gameplay or otherwise experience the game without actually having to play the game or get good at the game, or, have some sort of minimum level of skill at the game. Mm-hmm. Their argument being that people are being unfairly cheated out of the game experience because of this skill barrier that not everyone meets, and that it only pleases hardcore gamers, and it does nothing for those hardcore gamers for there to be these for there to be a simple mode or to just make games easier. And that the idea that you should be good at a game to play it is an extremely toxic idea that needs to be excised from the community. Okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah, right? Now, there's something really, really wrong with that argument.
You think?
But the problem is I have not been able to find the thing that is wrong in it. Because this has come up several times. It came up with Dark Souls, it's like, skill shouldn't be a barrier to experiencing the game. Obviously if games are art and you put skill in the way, you are putting obstacles in the way of experiencing the art. And there should be, why can't programmers just add easy modes to every game or make certain parts of the game skippable? And I do understand that, adding anything to a game is a trade-off. So the time that, taking the time to program an easier mode, even if it's just as simple as stat adjustments for enemies and player characters and what have you, is still time consuming. It still takes design resources. And if that's not going to serve your audience well, you're better off using that time on something else. Notwithstanding the fact that difficulty in a video game is rarely a matter of things like stats. In Dragon Warrior, yeah, it's all stats. If you just pumped up everybody's stats, the game would be easier. Or if you pumped up all the monster stats, the games would be harder. But in a platforming game, most of the difficulty comes from the level design, the placement of enemies, this and that and the other thing. So to make an easier version of the game, you would actually have to redesign every level of the game. And for a game like Dark Souls, where, the difficulty is actually built straight into all of the game mechanics, you're reprogramming a lot of that from the ground up. Right? But, okay, fine. That doesn't say that there shouldn't be one, and that doesn't say that it wouldn't increase the number of people playing the game if there were easier modes. So fast forward to all this argument about pay-to-win games. Video games where they have, like, loot boxes you can buy, or even power-ups that you can buy for real money, where basically you can pay to acquire things rather than, acquiring them in the game. Which essentially comes down to paying to not play the game. Right?
Yeah, kind of.
To some extent, like if you can buy like Shadow of War, the Shadow of Mordor sequel is a perfect example of that one, because one of the things you can buy is just an experience booster, which just boosts the speed at which your orcs and your strongholds and all that stuff level up. I haven't played it, so this is hearsay me giving. So basically what you're doing is just reducing the amount of game you're playing. You don't have to grind that much, okay?
Sure. I don't have to play that bit longer than I need to.
Right. And in going through all this stuff, it suddenly hit me what the issue is with the skill requirement argument really is. It's the idea that the gameplay component of the game is not an inherent part of the holistic work that is that video game. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, I think I do. Yeah. Like somehow the process of playing the game has been divorced from just the general experience of the game.
Right. And in the cases where you have this argument that the gameplay is too hard and it's preventing, it's actually beyond that, because they're saying the gameplay is an obstacle to the game experience.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of an integral part of it. I mean, not
right.
Like we talk, or I talk a lot about the different types of engagements that people get from playing games and participating in interactive media, and one of them is, the feeling of accomplishment that you get from overcoming a challenge and being better than you were. That's a reason a lot of people play games. But beyond that, there's a really screwed up idea that the gameplay portion of a video game is not part of the work of art. That would be like looking at a painting and say, you know what? This painting's really good, but we really need to get rid of the color red from all paintings because they're an obstacle to enjoying it. Red offends the eye. And I'm not saying, by the way, all games are works of art, okay? Some games are closer to art than others. Some games are just fun.
You got a bunch of problems with that whole mindset. I mean, some basic assumptions are pretty wrong in there too.
Mm-hmm.
That, the assumption that everybody should play every game.
Right. Well, yeah, there is a general sentiment that if anything exists these days, it should be for absolutely everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Which
is wrong.
I know it is wrong. But the problem is when people make that argument, you don't see how creating something for everyone diminishes the work.
Right. Well, that's the other half of the assumptions that are wrong is that games should be made for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing you learn with any creative work is know your audience.
Right.
Okay? And decide who your work is for.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Souls is not for me. Okay? Dark Souls 2, all that stuff. Not for me. Okay? I can appreciate that people enjoy it. I can appreciate that it's a hard game to play, and I can appreciate that it's got some interesting art, and maybe the music is good, and all that kind of stuff. I can appreciate all that stuff, but that does not mean that game is intended for me to play it.
Right.
The designers of that game made some conscious choices about the sort of people who would play it.
Mm-hmm.
And how to gear that game towards those people. Who basically they said, okay, we want these kind of people to play it. We want it, I'm just assuming here, we want it to be a hardcore gamer's game.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's part of the decision. When people look at Dark Souls, they get hopped up on the difficulty as the defining feature, and I think that's actually selling the game short. But that's a whole other argument.
Okay, whatever. Sorry. My point is though, they made a choice about who they wanted to play that game.
Absolutely.
Okay, mm-hmm. Just like a director makes a movie and if he's got some integrity, he has a particular audience in mind.
Right. And then he'll be told by the studio that he has to, bring in some more markets.
Right.
Because what do you got to hit, like at least 2 of the 4?
Something like that. Writers who write to an audience.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions you have to ask yourself when you set about writing a book is, who is my audience for this book? Because that will shape the way you approach your material.
Right.
Okay. So the idea that a game has to be for everybody is a bad assumption.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that designers have to design games for everybody is a bad assumption. And the idea that everybody will want to play the same games is a bad assumption.
Right.
After that, once we get rid of the bad assumptions, what are we left with? We're left with people making games for specific audiences and specific audiences enjoying a specific kind of game. And if you don't fit with that game's intended audience, then that game is not really for you.
Well, no, because then what you do is you go to whatever website you write for and complain that the games are exclusive and divisive and ruining the community.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's the games doing that.
No, I know.
A game just kind of sits there,
No,
But I understand the point you're making naturally, but not everything is for everybody. I don't demand that Joe Wall Street play D&D.
Right. No, he gave that up years ago. I kept killing his character. He was really pissed off.
Yeah. I don't insist that that my parents enjoy the same music I do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I know that there's a gap there that they don't cross, in terms of the music and that I listen to and the music that they listen to and enjoy. There's a difference there.
Right.
Okay. Occasionally something makes it across that gap, but not often.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the everything is for everyone mentality is the best way to make sure that everybody gets something they're unhappy with and nothing is actually any good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but now here's the weird thing. I guess, I don't know how to phrase this. Like, there is then an incentive to create something that is good for more people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, you have a bigger potential market.
Sure.
Right? So, well, no, you know what? I was just about to answer my own question, because in the end, you basically, you have to decide, you realize you're giving up a certain portion of your market by focusing on a certain niche or a certain market. You say, I'm going to focus on this market and therefore leave these markets behind, on the assumption that all of the people in that market who want the thing you're selling will do you better than the subset of the people in all markets who will be happy enough to buy your one-size-fits-all thing.
Mm-hmm.
But does it really go that way?
I feel like if you know what your market is,
mm-hmm.
and you know how to hook into that market, and get that niche or whatever to go for whatever your product is,
mm-hmm.
that you will make decisions that will increase your chances of being very, very successful in that market, that particular niche or whatever,
mm-hmm.
that you wouldn't make if you were trying to hit the broadest possible audience.
Right.
It's like a pound, or not a pound, but half a cup of jam. You can either put it on 2 or 3 slices of bread, or you can try to do 12 loaves.
Right.
So nothing. Either you get a whole lot of jam, or you get not quite enough jam.
Mm-hmm. So now, bringing this into a really weird, completely different direction.
A less jam-based direction? Okay.
I sort of have the same response that I have to that whole, remove the difficult parts from the game so that everybody can experience them, completely missing the point that, the game itself is part of the experience.
Right.
To GMs who are always looking for ways to reduce the amount of combat in their role-playing games, like in their D&D games.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of have the same reaction. Like, I think, you might be missing the point here.
Yeah.
Especially because players of D&D, on average, tend to enjoy a good fight. And D&D is designed around enjoyable fights.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, like we discussed last time, D&D is a combat-oriented rule set.
Yes.
If you want to play D&D, but you want less or no combat in D&D, then you don't want to play D&D, because it's not a set of rules that's geared to do that.
Right. It really doesn't do anything outside of combat very well.
Right.
After that, it's just sort of a generic action resolution system.
Yeah. You want a different game,
mm-hmm.
because you want a game that's going to support the things you want to play.
Right.
It's I've been known to say more than once that you can make D&D play any kind of game you want it to play.
You can.
And that's not wrong, but it also depends a lot on how much work you're willing to put in up front. And with the kind of work you need to put into D&D to make it a social, non-combat game, you might as well just write your own system.
Right. Nope, I agree with that 100%.
So, yeah, but to go back to your video game thing, yeah, the manner in which you play the game, the means by which you're given to play the game is part of that experience.
Right.
You know, if I gave Mario a gun instead of, you know, just letting him jump, that would be a totally different game than Super Mario.
Hey, fun fact. Did you know that actually in the original design documents for Super Mario Brothers, they were toying with the idea of giving him a gun?
Uh-huh.
Laser gun?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Sorry, just fun fact.
Laser Mario. That would be interesting. That would have really chipped Donkey Kong's chips.
Yeah, right?
The mechanics by which you play a video game, much like the mechanics by which you play a board game or an RPG, in a large part dictate what kind of experience you're capable of having.
Right.
So if, like in a video game, if you mismatch mechanics to what your game is about, or what you want your game to be about, or who you want it to appeal to, or whatever, you've got a broken game, one that doesn't work, you know, the way you intend it to work.
Right. Well, I mean, a good example of this, because I think it goes even deeper than that. I don't think it's just the mechanics themselves, but I think you can wire things into the gameplay experience. And I'm going to go back to Dark Souls. I know you're not particularly familiar with it.
I've watched you play.
So one of the things that is true of Dark Souls, even though it gets primarily sold on its difficulty, is that Dark Souls actually wants you to win. It wants you to experience the visceral thrill of a victory after a hard-fought struggle. And the way the game is set up so that after every death, the game is reset to exactly the point it was before you died, so that you can actually learn where the challenges are coming from and get better at dealing with them. The animations on the enemies are very deliberate, so that you can learn how the enemies move and react to what you do, and, you know, get better at dealing with them. And when enemies die, you know, everything they don't just die, they evaporate, and then there's like a big booming sound that comes on in a game that has very little music or sound. This big booming sound comes on, and it says, like, you know, you killed, or you slayed, or you defeated, or whatever, right? So that is part of the experience, is that it basically wants you to experience a struggle and come through it on the other side. You know, and it's set up to do that. Now, of course, a lot of people just find the struggle frustrating, and that's fine. But if you reduce the difficulty of the game, and by the way, that is also echoed in the story of the game, because you have to struggle even to understand the story. The story is not given to you. It's something that you have to work at. It's something you have to puzzle out. So even understanding what's going on is a victory of sorts. So the whole game is basically... And at the end of the game, it comes to nothing. Okay? The game is not even clear about what changes after you've beaten the game. And it seems like the universe just goes on exactly as it was. You just prolong whatever's happening. All of which adds up to a message that the value is in the struggle. And what changes from the struggle is not the world, it's you. And that's a message that wouldn't work without the struggle. It's something that you don't necessarily pick up consciously either. It's something that you experience. You know, it's like when you look at a painting, you say, well, it feels like this. You know, you feel the struggle, you feel the visceral thrill, and you feel the personal growth. So that in the end, when the ending doesn't change anything in the world, it really doesn't matter, because you got there.
And I think it kind of depends on the type of game, too, as to whether or not you would really even consider putting an easy mode on it.
Yeah.
Because I think... I'm going to regret saying this almost immediately, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think if it's a game with a good story, and you're primarily there for the story, then easy mode is very dependent on that story as to whether it exists in that game or not.
Right.
Okay? But if it's just like a bullet hell shooter or something like that, where there's not a lot of story, but there's just a ton of gameplay, I think an easy mode is more likely to be there, simply because the idea is to just shoot a lot of stuff and be shot at by a lot of stuff.
Right.
You know?
Well, the other thing too is, like, if you have a story in a game, you know, and it's got themes and you're trying to actually communicate a good story, then the difficulty of the game, if the difficulty is not doing anything to serve the story, then a good game designer will ratchet it down anyway.
Yeah.
You know, like, you won't make it an overwhelming challenge. And I'll go again to, like, the Dragon Quest and the other turn-based RPGs. The challenges in the game, you know, aside from some of the bosses, can be entirely negated simply by gaining more numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You know? It's not really about you getting good at the game so much as you spending time with the game.
Yeah, it essentially comes down to, do I have enough numbers yet to where when he starts subtracting those numbers, I still have some left?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, there are little tactical decisions to be made. I was talking. Tiny's been playing Dragon Quest VIII, and I was talking to her about it. And, you know, like, one of the things I do is you switch my main character between the boomerang and a sword, because the boomerang hits all targets, but you give up targeting control of it with it.
Right.
And the sword, you know, so it's nice to have one of each. And I mean, those are just little strategic decisions that you can make. You don't have to.
Yeah. Because
you can brute force your way through the game.
Oh, absolutely.
But you know,
I have on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
Ambassador Oniguma. Is that good? That meets your approval there for pronunciation?
You have gotten me in so much trouble with pronunciation, sir.
I don't want to hear it. I looked on your website. I saw the feedback for the last one.
Did you see it?
They can get stuffed. I read what you wrote.
I just pushed you right under that bus too. I just write it down. Please stop.
Oh man. And yet nobody comes to me and says anything.
Nope. The funny thing is, I'm the one they should be afraid of.
Yeah. I'm a nice guy, really. As long as you don't cross me.
Yeah, we've all heard that wolf pelt story.
Yeah. Ambassador Oniguma wrote into the website on episode 9 regarding our discussion about how much of the game is to be treated as Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
He says, imagine that you are playing chess with someone and your opponent says, I charge with my horse in a straight line and trample your peon and bishop. Would you allow it? I didn't think so.
Well, that's en passant, isn't it?
RPGs are a role-playing experience, but it's also a game. And many players feel cheated if they think the rules allow them to make something and the GM says no. Because some part of the RP is making character creation decisions like spells, feats, or attributes. That's an incomplete sentence there, and I don't know what to do with it now.
Mm-hmm.
So when the GM says you will have to...
Oniguma is someone that I've had contact with on Twitter. I do not believe English is his first language.
No, he's from other parts. That's fine. Mm-hmm. I'm cool with that. I just don't know what to do with that sentence from there.
Yeah, well, just read it as is.
It did. You're interrupting me going on to the next sentence.
I thought you were poking fun at our ambassador here.
No. So when the GM says you will have to RP or act the negotiation with the Baron, you feel cheated of your choice of having a high charisma and the persuasion skill. I think the point he's making is that if your GM requires you to act out your interaction, that you lose the benefit of the high charisma and persuasion. Mm-hmm. And that's unfair because you've made a choice to take those things and put some numbers on them. And that's where he's at with it.
And I agree with the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
but that does lead to a problem in practice.
Yes.
Okay. I agree that actually requiring someone to act out the interaction perfectly before you will allow them a die roll, or not even allowing them a die roll at all and just doing it based entirely on the interaction, or, you know, how they act. Yeah, those things are wrong. On the other hand, the player does still have to be able to arrive at a decision about how they are negotiating.
Right.
Okay, you can't just negotiate with someone if you don't have any leverage, or you don't have anything that they want, or you don't have a sense of what they want. A negotiation is a puzzle where the puzzle box is another person. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And in a role-playing game, if there was a puzzle lock on a door, like you know, one of the, like there's a chess puzzle, right? Since we're talking about chess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the door is locked and there's a chess puzzle in front of it. The GM would not simply allow you to say, well, I look at the chess puzzle and solve it. I have a high intelligence, roll the intelligence and solve the puzzle. Because if that's all you're going to do, there's no point in putting the puzzle in the game. Right? You could just label that lock with, and there's a puzzle lock. Do you know what I'm saying? Is there's still, to some extent, the player's brain has to be involved in the choice.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you can distill this down to playing an entire role-playing game being a matter of, I roll to win the game. You know? Like, take combat, for example. Okay? In a combat situation, you could, oh, well, you know, the players aren't trained in combat, but they don't have to be because the characters have stats. But the players are still choosing how to use their actions, what abilities to use their actions on, whether to heal their friend or bet on the fact they can win the fight before their friend dies, or any, you know, all sorts of decisions like that. Those all come from the players. They don't come from the character's knowledge of how to fight. The players, even though they're not trained combatants, they still have to figure something out in that. They have to, you know, I'll use the high ground, or I'll do this, or I'll do that, or, you know, hopefully the hit points will last long enough for me to win this fight, whatever. Okay, you can't take all declaration of action and planning and thought away from the players, because at that point, you might as well just say, okay, roll to win. You know, the players still have to have something more than I negotiate at the Baron.
And also, just as a GM, I need something to work with besides just a die roll.
Right.
You know, I need some, and it doesn't have to be this big acting thing. I just need some input about what your character is actually doing in order to work with that in a story and plot moving way.
Well, I mean, when you get down to it, that's just the mechanics of the game, right? The player declares an action. The GM listens to that action, decides whether it's possible, figures out how to resolve it using the rules, and resolves the action. Okay, you can't get to the die roll until the player says, has some sort of firm statement about what they are trying to accomplish and how they are trying to accomplish it. You know? Which is, right. I negotiate with the Baron. Okay, great. What do you want out of him? Mm-hmm. You know? And what are you offering? And then we'll see if he takes that offer. And then the die roll accounts for all of the stuff that you can't possibly take into consideration, like, oops, you accidentally insulted him, or oops, he's in a bad mood today and he's not in the mood to negotiate, or oh good, he's in a good mood and he lets it go for less, or he got distracted at the wrong moment and agreed to something he shouldn't have, or something like that. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what the die roll represents. The die roll represents all the little quirks of fate that add up to whether or not something actually works out the way you want it to.
The thing is, though, I feel like that's the kind of thing, I don't know, maybe you're a new player and you don't know to do this, but I feel like it's the kind of thing a GM with a new player or a player joining a new table should, sort of inquire about as to what the local rules are. Mm-hmm. How they're different or whatever. Or house rules or does your GM want you to role play all your social interactions, or they don't ask you to swing swords at each other. I don't know why they would anyway, but that's like basic information that should be there at the start. Which, I realized the original discussion point was how much of it is Word of God and you have to follow it exactly. And I think over the course of the last few episodes, we've actually managed to answer that in a variety of ways, some surprising, some not.
Mm-hmm.
I guess more than anything, it would just be really wonderful if everybody played my way and not their own.
Yeah, but
I was going to say an entirely different sentence, but then I realized that's what that sentence was going to amount to.
Well,
so, there you go.
Yeah, the problem is I've seen the way you play. You play wrong.
Yeah, right. Sure. I'm convinced you're the one who makes the errors. So I want to ask you about something that you had said last week that we didn't follow up on.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you had quit playing Secret of Mana?
Oh, yes. Very near to the end, too.
Oh, yeah. I kind of remember that, and I was just wondering what that was all about. I mean, You just gave up, or what?
Oh, yeah, I rage quit.
Oh.
And here's the thing. Like,
did you throw the controller?
No. I am...
Okay.
Now old enough to know that if I throw my controller, mommy and daddy are not going to buy me a new one when it breaks. So,
Okay.
There are certain behaviors that were totally acceptable were a kid, but once you become a property owner are no longer.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Carry on.
So Secret of Mana, it's an action RPG for the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
And I've recently been told that it is coming out, that they're doing a remake for it for PS4.
Right.
And it came out in 1993, and it was, I don't remember how well received it actually was, but a lot of people have very, very fond memories of it. And it is a highly rated, beloved game. It's one of those things that everybody who plays it, oh my God, Secret of Mana, I remember it, I loved it. It's been called like the high point of 16-bit RPGs, which... So I had never finished it. In fact, I never played very much of it, and I didn't remember why. So once I got my little console hooked up and running, it was one of the games that I jumped into and started playing. And it's a terrible game. There are, I know that there were, knowing that, there's certain things I know now that I wouldn't have known then. And one of the things was that there was a huge issue with the localization of the game, in which the localizer was given 1 month to translate all of the text in the game, and it being a Square role-playing game, there was a lot of text, and they weren't allowed to reprogram the text parser from the game, which would change the amount of text they could display on screen. So they jettisoned like a third of all the game's text. So the story does not make a whole lot of sense to begin with. And and basically, from as near as I could tell, the story was identical to the Final Fantasy VI story. But the story aside, ostensibly it seems like a fun game. You take control of 3 characters, boy, girl, and sprite. They don't have official names, or at least I think they did in the Japanese, but they don't have official games in English. So you name them, boy, girl, and sprite. 2 of them are controlled by the AI, unless you choose to have 2 friends play with you, which was an interesting choice because there were only ever 2 players allowed on the Super Nintendo unless you had an add-on for it, and then that would allow you to have up to 4 players. So that right there, they were going to be controlled by the AI. Which was something that not a lot of other action role-playing games did. To my knowledge, actually, it's the only co-op action role-playing game with even 2-player simultaneous play from that era. I mean, I know there are other simultaneous action games, but not like that. So it's basically like playing Legend of Zelda with a friend, or 2 friends.
Okay.
And, you run around, you have a weapon, and you attack things on the screen, and then you fight bosses, and the characters have spells and what have you. Simple enough premise, but it did some really, really unique things. And this is where, like, this leads into the question that I want to throw at you.
Okay.
But I feel if I don't justify why I'm calling it a terrible game, I'm going to get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, like I said, it has 3 characters and they are AI controlled. Unless you have 2 friends playing with you, and you didn't. Okay, because it's not the sort of game that needs multiple players anyway. Right? So the AI control, you could actually program it to take actions or not take, and to attack or defend and do stuff. A very rudimentary way you could decide how aggressive you wanted the AI to be. The AI is constantly getting hung up on these really busy environments. So you're constantly running around back and forth trying to unlatch the AI from everything. And if you're trying to run through an area and avoid combat because you just need to get to the town to heal, the AI is constantly getting hung up on things and dragging you back and stuff like that. Okay?
Okay.
There's a unique combat system where there's a little bit of a stamina gauge. So after you attack with a weapon, your weapon basically has to recharge. It counts up from 0 to 100%, and then you can swing again. If you swing before it's recharged, it does much less damage. That's neat. Ideally it causes you to think more carefully about your swat. Don't just swing away. You've got to pick and choose your shots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except in practice, the recharge is just a little bit too long to be fun. So you actually spend a lot of time just attack, walk slightly away from the enemy, wait, and attack again. Okay. On top of that, you also have, as you gain levels, you can do more attacks with your weapon. So you hold down the attack button to charge it up, and you can unleash more powerful attacks. The charging takes forever, and you move extremely slowly while you're charging it up. So now these are 2 unique combat elements, one of which is an annoyance and the other one you never use. You never charge up your attacks because they take so long. And because it slows your movement and everything moves too damn fast. And when you use one of these powerful attacks, you get locked into an animation. So if you're not aimed perfectly at where the enemy is going to be, you're not going to land anyway. And the hit detection is really buggy. Right? There's a unique menu system that makes it very different. Like in shops, you have to buy one thing at a time and you can't compare the stats on items to different items. So you never know what you're buying or whether it's better or and you can't buy like multiples of them at once. It's like all these little interesting ideas, and the menu system is neat. It's this ring-based thing that expands out of your character and contracts, and you can change menus, and it looks really pretty, and it is a huge obstacle to actually doing anything. Right? And then there's the fact that, like, in order to facilitate the whole charging of a weapon thing, most attacks in the game have, like, some sort of a stun lock or knockdown, where if an enemy gets hit, they get knocked over, and it takes them a second to stand up again. The problem with that is that the enemies can only be attacked at certain points in their animation. So while they're being knocked down, they can't be attacked again. While they're laying on their back, they can be attacked until such time as they start to get up. And then they become invincible again until they stand up. And then they are a threat again. So there's this very, very narrow window of opportunity to hit the enemy again that you have to kind of finesse with the length of time it takes your weapon to charge. Right?
Right.
But you have 2 AI partners who are attacking. They're just attacking like crazy at the same time you are. So you spend this whole time, like, your 3 little characters, you'll hit, you'll knock an enemy down, and then everybody waits for the exact frame of animation that the enemy can be hit again, and then all your attacks come out, one of them will hit, and then the enemy will just lay there, and then you have to wait for the frame of animation, and because the AI knows the frames of animation, it's always going to get it right. So at that point, once you've knocked down an enemy, you can leave it alone and let your friends just kill it. Beat on it while it's dead, down. You also get frequently stun locked. Various effects lock you down, put you to sleep, set you on fire so you can't move. Now, you can change characters at any time during the game, and you can also cast spells from other characters and do actions from other characters and all that stuff, except when you're stun locked. Suddenly all of that's disabled. So you think, oh, I got stun locked, I'll just switch to another character and keep playing. No, you just have to wait it out. And if one of your AI partners gets stun locked, you can't move off the screen because they're over there. So the point is, there's all these really, really unique elements that people talk about. You know, the menu system, the spell system, the combat system, the AI partners, all of that stuff. It was all very, very brilliant ideas, and everybody sings all the praises of how unique this game was and how it tried all these wonderful things. But you reach a certain point in the game where all of the little annoyances just get to be a little bit too much. And the enemy hit points are a little bit too high. It takes too long to kill an enemy. The enemies do a lot of damage and they stun lock you. So you'll walk onto some screens, and if you get unlucky and an enemy attacks you as soon as you get close to them, then you and your party all get knocked down, and the enemies just keep hammering on you while you're knocked on the ground until you're out of hit points. And it was pretty much at that point, in the second to last dungeon of the game, that I had enough of it. And
yeah, I can believe that.
Yeah.
That sounds really annoying.
You know what, though? It doesn't feel it at first. It's one of those things where the annoyances have to all add up. You don't notice them at first. It's just, oh, this is neat. This is kind of fun. You know? And they don't throw too many enemies at one time, and even working with your little partners isn't too bad. Then you start getting spells, then the enemies start getting spells, then the enemies have more status effects, and then you run into the stun lock thing, and you realize that all you're doing is knocking down opponents and waiting for your little robot allies to hammer away at them because you're not going to get in another hit. You know, and the number of times you charge up a powerful attack and then swing and miss the enemy's hitbox by a pixel, you know, all that stuff, it just adds up. And so I shut it off. And I didn't even know where the story was going. So I'm like, I don't know. There's a tree and there's a fortress and an evil empire, except the devil and who the hell knows. But here's the question in all of this.
Alrighty.
Okay. This was a really, really innovative game. It tried to do a lot of unique things that no other role-playing game did. And it has been praised for that. My argument is it fails in the execution so badly that the game is not good and does not deserve the praise. But then I get into arguments about Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, which is a system that I feel deserves respect because it was filled with a lot of unique ideas. And it was willing to make a lot of changes. And I have actually called the system brave. You know, I've called it brave as opposed to 5th edition, which I basically felt was corporate committee design schlock. You know, which I still like it, I still play it, but it's not bravely designed the way 4th edition was. 4th edition took chances. And I tell people, no, 4th edition deserves more respect. Am I a hypocrite?
It's not like you're holding two mutually exclusive opinions about the same thing.
So I'm not a hypocrite on a technicality.
Right. I don't know. I think you can recognize individual pieces of an overall experience as being good or bad or whatever without necessarily changing your opinion of the overall experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of what criticism and critique are all about.
Right.
You know? So I don't know. I don't think you're being a hypocrite. I just think that the fact that you find 4th edition brave is amusing to me. I mean, it's a word, okay. But no, I think Because a lot of good things have come out of things that were otherwise failures, innovations and that kind of stuff.
Right.
If you find something, even the worst games can have something good in them.
Mm-hmm.
It might be poorly implemented, or it might have an unintended result, or may cause a few problems. But it can still be an essentially at its core good idea or a good thing.
Right.
I've played more than a few games where the game itself was not really all that great, but it did a couple of really interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
Either a particular mechanic or a piece of story element or something like that. Okay, all right. Here's a good one for you.
Yeah.
Far Cry Primal. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That it technically Far Cry 5. I mean,
right.
If you want to talk sequences, but it's the one where they go back to the caveman days.
Right.
For whatever reason, it's not a particularly good game in the Far Cry series,
mm-hmm.
and I don't think it's a particularly good game overall for games of its type.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that kind of open world, first person shooty kind of thing.
Yeah. Open world first person shooter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have a really
which basically works out to be a toy box. So
yeah.
Here's a base you can attack. Here's a monster you can fight. Here's all these things. Go have at it. Have fun.
Yeah. So it's not a particularly good game,
mm-hmm.
but it does have a really neat pet system in it, I think.
Okay.
So it's got, if you were going to do a game that relied on you having pets as combatants in some way, I don't know, there's probably a game like that out there somewhere, but, and you wanted it in sort of a first person shooter environment, then you could reasonably say, look at Far Cry Primal for hints on how to do that fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's one example.
What did it do? I'm just curious because I haven't played Far Cry Primal.
Yeah, it's been so long since I've played it. I just remember liking the system.
Okay.
But it gave you a variety of animals to choose from.
Right.
And of course you had to like tame them out in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a little system built in to do that. You'd throw down some bait and they'd come in and then you could sort of calm them. It was kind of goofy because you were clearly, you were going to be outmatched by any of these critters should they take a dislike to you. But theoretically, the bait you threw out helped them acquaint themselves with your presence, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so you do that, and then you got like say you got a saber-toothed tiger, right?
Yeah.
The way you worked with it, it was as easy to work with as, say, shooting a weapon within the game. So
you could aim your saber-tooth tiger and fire it, and it would go kill someone?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
And so, and there were a lot of other things you could get them to do as well, but that's just, the example. But it was a very easy to use, flexible system that gave you a variety of interesting effects when it was working.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of thing is what I mean when I say not good games can have interesting systems in them that have some value. Right. And that you can like those systems without actually having to like the entire game. So a while back, I noticed Jeremy Crawford on Twitter was saying that they already have the next big adventure planned for next year for 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, is there a way we can look at what's come out already and make a reasonable guess at what the next big adventure might be? Because if we know one thing, it's that pretty much everything that's come out has been a remake, retread, expansion on popular modules that have already come out. Popular
classic modules.
Or classic modules.
There's definitely a time period from which they are drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So what have they done? Because they did Ravenloft.
They did Ravenloft, yes.
They did Against the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
They did, what was it? Oh, Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah.
That was Princes of the Apocalypse. Out of the Abyss, was that basically the Drow series?
I think so, yeah. Because you're, yeah.
Yeah, that was the Drow of the Underdark series. Yeah, because that was all the Menzo Barans and stuff.
Right.
So, and Chult, Tomb of Annihilation is a weird one because, like, is that really supposed to be Tomb of Horrors?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it there, but especially because Tomb of Horrors wasn't set in Chult. But
no,
it's a good question. Like, what? Like, I'm trying to think back to classic modules, and yeah, okay, I'm looking at some of the art for Tomb of Annihilation, and yeah, you got the devil face right there in the Lich. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, what else could they do? Yeah, I mean, you have to consider, like, they follow a definite pattern with these, because, and, you know, we kind of called it, because when we were talking about predicting what would be in Tomb of Annihilation, except for a few details, we kind of had the format of the adventure pretty well down.
Right.
You know? So they tend to like an adventure that lets them introduce an interesting region and around sort of a central location that offers traditional Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon crawling type experiences scattered around that region. And usually they seem to they want to highlight an interesting mechanic. You know, like in Out of the Abyss, it was the sanity mechanic.
Yeah.
And in Curse of Strahd, it was all built around the Taroka deck. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know what? When you asked this in the chat, I had an answer, and now I can't remember what it was. What was
I know what your answer was.
Well, can you tell me what it was?
Yes, you said Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, but you thought you were joking at the time.
Well, wait, yeah, okay, that wasn't my real answer. That was the joke answer. What was there was a series of adventures set in Maztica.
Oh, okay, I know what it was. It was not Tamawachan or Tamawakan. No. It was the other thing. Saltmarsh?
Saltmarsh was another one of my answers. The Sinister Secret. There was a trilogy of adventures based around the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, or around Saltmarsh, and that I think would lend itself really well. Because it has a nice central location, which is obviously the town of Saltmarsh itself. It offers nice traditional classic dungeon crawling, and beyond that, you know, like they can. It's actually one that they've revisited. Like Saltmarsh was an iconic city in in one or two of the D&D 3rd edition publications.
Yeah.
So it's one that they have that's obviously on their radar.
Well, I actually kind of liked your Expedition to the Barrier Peaks suggestion, even though you thought it was a joke.
Well, that's because I hate Expedition to Barrier Peaks.
But are we going to spoil this thing if I say it's got a big spaceship in it at some point?
You know what? It's how many years old now? Besides, as we pointed out with the Tomb of Annihilation, they're going to spoil it because they do not know how to handle having a really good premise that you have to hide, you know?
Because I've never played Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, but as I understand it, weird critters are pouring out of the mountains or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the party is hired or contacted to go figure out what's going on. They go there, and it turns out this spaceship has crash landed.
Yeah.
In the Barrier Peaks. And then all of a sudden, everybody has laser guns, and then there's a lot of shooting, and things go badly after that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty fair summary, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's things like laser guns and an exoskeleton and colored key cards in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm just thinking, you could, if you were extremely clever, redo that module and expand it in some interesting ways.
Well, they wouldn't even have to be extremely clever. They have proven that cleverness is not necessarily a prerequisite for what they publish. Ooh, that was mean. I'm sorry.
What if? Yeah. What if this spaceship was actually a Spelljammer ship?
Huh. Oh God, I hope not.
And then we could go touring the planes in a D&D 5th edition module. It's a great idea. They should totally do that.
Okay. I will say that it is an idea that would be good for people who aren't me.
Uh-huh.
But I also think that it's a little too large in scope for what they would do. And they're just gonna do like the one-time deal with this, right? I mean, it's not like they're gonna revisit it or turn it into a series or anything else. That's not what they do anymore.
Mm-mm.
But Barrier Peaks is interesting because it had some weird mechanics to it, based around all the futuristic weaponry.
Right.
And when the parties would use a weapon, depending on the type of weapon they used and what they used it on, there was this random element to what the actual outcome would be. Like sometimes it would actually hurt the person using it, and sometimes it would explode, and sometimes it would expend charges and not do anything, because the players didn't know how to use the stuff, and because it had been damaged and left to rot in this alien spaceship for too long. Sort of like, did you ever play a great board game, The Awful Green Things from Outer Space?
I did not.
Oh my God. It's an awesome board game, and it was republished by Steve Jackson Games. And it is about the cartoon crew of a intergalactic exploration ship called the Xenutar, led by Captain Yid and the mascot, his pet, Ook, the three-eyed bird creature. Uh-huh. They pick up a rock on an alien planet, and the rock turns out to be the egg of these green monsters called the Awful Green Things.
Ah.
And they gradually spread throughout the ship. So, there's one player takes control of the crew, and one player takes control of the Awful Green Things. The Awful Green Things can reproduce. They have a life cycle, so adults lay eggs, and eggs hatch into babies, and babies grow into adults. So, and then they gradually spread throughout the ship and eat the crew. The crew can pick up various items around the ship, most of which are weapons, but some of which are just random things like pool cues and like communication devices, all sorts of just weird little random things, and try to use them as weapons. And every game you draw chips from a bag whenever you use a weapon to determine that weapon's effect for the rest of the game. So the crew constantly has to experiment with the weapon to find out like what the fire extinguisher actually does. And some of them will actually cause the Awful Green Things to grow and shrink, or it'll actually cause them to reproduce. So it's a neat mechanic. And the crew, by the way, if you ever play the game, the crew is screwed. The crew is fun to play, and they lose. Okay? That's just it. I always used to play with my dad, and I always used to love being the crew, because this is an old game. It was first published, according to the source of all knowledge, it was originally published 1979 by Tom Wham. It was an insert in Dragon magazine. And then was published by TSR in a box in 1980. And it's adorable. And my dad taught me how to play it. And I always wanted to play the crew because they were cool. Not like the monsters. And he always let me. He was always happy to let me play the crew.
Yeah, I'm dead.
My dad was competitive. We could not play Risk in my house because I was very competitive too. So Anyway, I digress. The point is, in Expedition to Barrier Peaks, there is a mechanic very much like that, where all these futuristic weapons have sort of random effects. And I think that that's the sort of thing that wizards would really sink their teeth into, because using a random weapon you find would by having to roll on 3 different tables, that's exactly the sort of thing that people who invented the Wild Mage Sorcerer would love.
Right up until they got the mayonnaise gun.
Oh, God. But, while we're on the subject, have they done White Plume Mountain yet?
No, they haven't.
They could do that.
Well, sure. But I feel like White Plume Mountain, it would be a lot like Tomb of Horrors.
Right. Well, White Plume Mountain, what they would do is they would spend a lot of time not in White Plume Mountain. Right.
Exactly.
Trying to think what else, because there were a lot of adventures, but we're sort of getting to the ones that you wouldn't necessarily call... like they've done all the A-list stuff now. Now they have to start doing the B-list stuff, or, God forbid, they're actually going to have to start coming up with original material.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a particular pick.
Yeah.
Because as I have said before, I never really played modules.
Yeah, and me neither. There was the OA series, the Oriental Adventures series. I could see them doing that. What was it? Like, Swords of the Daimyo was the first one. And then they could build on that. Dwellers of the Forbidden City. You ever hear of that one? I'm actually just looking now at a list of classic modules. Apparently it's been ranked the 13th best module of all time by someone. I could see them doing something interesting with the Keep on the Borderlands, but they also use that for the open playtest. What about the Deserts of Desolation series?
What about the Deserts of Desolation series?
They could do that.
They could.
That's another one.
And you could tell me how wonderful that's all going to be, and the brilliant way they could handle it, except that, unfortunately, we're out of time.